I think it's a mixed basket. I would put it like that. So I think Secretary General Rutte and the member states did what they could at what the possibility was, what the potential to achieve that summit was, given the differences between the allies and the Trump administration on Russia. So I think there are some achievements that have to be acknowledged, and I think the 5% GDP pledge is historic. It's symbolically important. It's certainly also politically very useful. Of course, this is something that is used to appease the United States, their concerns, to avoid friction with the Trump administration. But again, the 3% core defense spending is important, and it can significantly strengthen the readiness and the force posture. So I think it's also what's important is the focus on expanding the European defense production capacity. This is also a very good, important achievement. The 1.5% on resilience, the spending, it's important too, but of course it opens up, it can potentially become a sort of place where you just put irrelevant projects, not necessarily important for the military and defense capacity. So I think in general, it's very important. There were no drama, as some expected, given again the stance of the Trump administration. I think the Secretary General Rutte again made what was possible, avoided any disconcerting statements or happenings. So I think that's in general, it went quite well. But of course, there were also very notable absences for instance, from the declaration. And one important question is of course, Russia. So at the Washington summit, the promise was that NATO was supposed to prepare a comprehensive Russia strategy, move that forward. And apparently this did not happen, at least not in the official part. And Russia is mentioned just once in the declaration from the summit. It is important mention because it talks about long-term threat from Russia. This is true, this is significant, but it's also quite limited. So I think that was a missed opportunity, in a sense, to move forward the alliance's common stance on Russia, which is incredibly important given what the communique says. It's a long-term threat, which I agree. So it's a mix. There are some positive, but there are certain also uncertainties about, again, so the 5% is important, but the question is how it will be implemented, if it will be real spending, a good spending, right choices, not just, injecting lots of money into defense without really generating the capacity and capability. This can be a historical change. So the big question will be how it will be implemented in the future. Experts that are following the development of the transatlantic relationships, the relation with Russia, certainly noted that the declaration was shorter than usual. And again, there is much less mentioning of Russia. There is no mentioning of China at all. So, but again, I mean, we have to be realistic. The situation is as it is, and there are differences between key allies and the United States on how to address the problem of Russia, how to approach the further support for Ukraine in their war against Russia, or in the defensive war against Russia. So. And I think so that's there is the realization that what was possible, and within that possibility framework, I mean, we achieved what we could, and it was important because still there was a statement of unity. Trump showed up. We had an important signal that was sent, but the implementation part will be critical. So the reactions in Russia were, it was the foreign minister Lavrov, who said basically this is a sign of Western falling apart. But this is exactly what Russia was hoping for and waiting for over the past 2 years. It did not happen. And there is no reason it have to happen. But again, it will be critical how the European allies will actually approach this issue seriously or not. The allies can spend 5% of GDP, but it's so important how and where the money will be actually put, right? It can look good on paper, but in reality, will this actually generate capacity and capability? So that's the key questions. That's an important question about the future generation that will take power, right? And will make decisions. So However, I'm probably not the most representative person to answer this question because my students predominantly are military officers. That being said, there were still, over the years I've been teaching at the National Defense University College over 17 years here in Oslo, among other places. But there is certainly more awareness about the challenge that Russia poses. And I mean, there has always been, especially here in Norway, Russia has been a security and defense problem. However, the immediacy, the urgency of the challenge and threat varied. And I think there is a realization, especially after the full invasion of Ukraine, that Russia is an urgent question. This is not something that will pose a problem in the next 10 years. This is now. So I think this has been changing. I know, though, from my colleagues, I'm not teaching the students myself in civilian universities, just occasionally, that there is less unity, the understanding of the security landscape, and again also the scope and urgency of the threat varies among students at civilian universities. There is a concern about the environmental issues and how spending on warfare will impact spending, for instance, on addressing the threat of climate change and welfare, education, health, etc. And this is absolutely a valid question. I think that's what the European politicians will have to figure out. My answer to that is that without security, we will not have welfare. We will not be able to address anything if there will be actually a direct confrontation with Russia, which, in my view, strengthening European and transatlantic defense and deterrence lowers the threat and allows us to continue living in a system where we actually have welfare and can address other threats. So I think in my mind, that's the answer. Without the foundation, without the security, we have nothing. It's a critical question. I think this is also a work for associations like yours, but of course also for politicians to explain to the broader public what kind of threat we are dealing with. And I think there has been a progress in the Western countries, including here in Norway, on communicating to the public what is the nature of the threat that we are facing. So, for instance, declassifying parts of the intelligence information to show the scale of cyber attacks. For instance, the sabotage, the immense Russian plans for rearmament, and the explaining the logic behind that, which I also am trying to do, that this is something that has been actually quite consistent long term, and there is very little chance it can change with this regime. So I think information and education is incredibly important in this context. I think when we talk about the regime in Russia, I mean, if they do what they can. So, and we certainly can shape also their decision making, and again contributing to limiting Russia's room for maneuver with increased meaningful defense spending can influence the regime. As in 2009, when we had the climate change summit in Copenhagen, Russia actually came with a first climate doctrine. So I think it is possible to influence the regime. However, the expansion we've seen over the past actually at least 15 years in the Russian foreign policy, the expansionist thinking, it's not going to disappear, but it can be managed and can be limited. I think the military, the strength, is the number one. Without that, no diplomacy will really work. Unless, of course, we will be giving away what Russia wants. And I think Russia proved this time and time again, that military force has played increasing role in Russian foreign policy, in Russia's pursuing its foreign policy objectives. Over the past 15 years, we've seen this in Georgia. We've seen this, of course, in Syria, in Ukraine a number of times, but also in interference using, paramilitary operations such as in Montenegro with the attempted state coup in 2016 or in Moldova in 2023. Without the force is the foundation. Without that, Russia will not respect, Russia will not stop. It's not just philosophy, it's not just what we can see from theory. We've seen that over the past 15 years at least. So this issue has become extremely politicized, right? And very, very sensitive, given that the threat of nuclear use has been used by Russia supporters, by Russia, to try to limit the Western support for Ukraine and, divide NATO, coordinate to be more accommodating to Russia. But that being said, it is a real issue. It is a part of Russian strategy. I don't think that denying it helps us, actually. The possible limited use of non-strategic nuclear weapons is part of the Russian strategy. Russia has both the doctrine, capacities, and also operational pattern over years have shown that this is the case. But so the answer, in my view, is not to, deny that, but rather find solutions to that, to undermine that strategy. That I think makes much more sense. During the Russian threats during the war, during the full-scale invasion, it's a whole story, of course. There were moments where it was becoming real, and the indications are October 2022. That's what I also heard from Pentagon, high-ranking Pentagon officials, and it's been also reported in incredible reporting by, among others, by the New York Times. That being said, this is not a static issue, right? I mean, Russia will not just decide, okay, we're moving forward. It will depend on the cost, risk, benefit, on the assessment of the situation on the ground, of what kind of response Russia will get. Will there be response at all? And what will be the price that Russia will have to pay? So it's a dynamic concept. When it comes to the Russian, the amendments to the nuclear doctrine that were made in December 2024, this, in my view, is broadly assessed as, yes, Russia has lowered the threshold for nuclear use. And of course, it's related to the Russia trying to regain its credibility as a nuclear power, because, of all these huge threats and plethora of threats that were made by Putin over the 3 years, the effect of them weakened over the time. I don't think they were designed, these threats, to last this long, because this war was not supposed to last this long. So, there was really a limited room for maneuver for Putin to really up the ante, because they went so high at the very beginning. So I think the Russian nuclear exercises, the verbal threats, and the amendments to the doctrine are a part of the same. It's a push. It's an attempt, again, to threaten, to scare both the broader European and US public and the politicians, again, to be more accommodating and limit the scope of aid to Ukraine. I wrote a piece, an article of an analysis of this doctrine for the United States Institute of Peace in January 2020 this year, saying that, well, in the language, yes, the threshold is lowered. In reality, I don't think that changes that much, because already the previous formulations in the Russian doctrine were so broad that they can do a lot. But this is, of course, a communication. This is a signaling. This is a strategy in trying to influence and shape our thinking and actions. So I don't think in reality it's a big change. On the paper, it is. When it comes to our responses, the question is, do we have a strategy that can counter a Russian, that can limit or dissuade Russia from a potential use? So basically, what kind of price Russia would pay, and what is the probability that we would actually answer? And I think that's an important question, the probability, right? I mean, so the logic is, if Russia is, the limited use is very limited, that even the radioactive damage would not be that high, would the West risk a potential all-out massive escalation and risk even, the civilization's existence? So the question is, do we have an answer that would be limited enough as well? And I think that's To me, that's the core issue. It's not necessarily to have, the same number of kinds of warheads, but being able to ensure that Russian use and escalation carries enough risks. And that's, this has to be done both on the political and military level, right? And of course, forward deploying dual capable aircrafts is one important solution, increasing visibility of NATO's nuclear sharing, also discussing it, right? It's been for a very long time, we didn't really have a discussion about NATO as a nuclear power, nuclear alliance, really. Of course, it was all the time, but even increasing that and discussing it. I think maintaining and modernizing the US nuclear weapons in Europe is also very important. Exercises, updating plans to make them credible to Russia. It's also part of the response. But of course, also the conventional force credibility is a part of the package to dissuade Russia from attempts at limited aggression. So it has to be done in a comprehensive way, not necessarily symmetrical way. But again, I think it's important to acknowledge that and act on it accordingly. I've been observing this development since the early 2000s, and it was a very slow movement in NATO to actually even put the High North and the Arctic on the agenda. And it was also because there was also a pushback from Canada over many years to even have, and Denmark, to have formal references to the region. Norway contributed a lot to bring the High North in particular, so the European part of the Arctic, on the alliance's security and strategic horizon. But actually until 2014, not that much was happening. And we had exercises, of course, and discussions, etc. But actually the increase in presence, expansion of exercises, it follows after 2014 in particular. And I must say that actually the first presidency of Trump has contributed to that. So we see a change in the US policy towards the Arctic, or an adjustment, let's say, maybe that's more correct word, into a more assertive stance, into more dynamic countering of US competitors in the region. So in particular, Russia and China, we have quite bold statements by Mark Pompeo, and a number of steps that were taken, including reestablishing the US Second Fleet to counter Russian presence in the North Atlantic. We had creation of Arctic Command. We have expansion of exercises in size, including the Trident Juncture NATO exercise in 2019, when we actually hosted the first aircraft carrier above the Arctic Circle since the Cold War. So it was really significant, and a number of presence of other strategic capacities, such as flying US Lancet bombers, landing on Norwegian bases, just to show the presence, communicate the readiness to defend the region, strengthen deterrence. So it was, so what I used to say that NATO's focusing, changing, and increasing focus on the High North and Nordic flank was slow, and then it changed slowly, then suddenly. And certainly right now there is there is no doubt about High North being discussed and war gamed, and there are plans, of course, for strengthening NATO presence further in the region, and of course the enlargement of NATO to Finland and Sweden has further contributed, further strengthened the imprint of NATO in the region, from just statements and discussions and occasional exercises. We actually have a real NATO presence. It is not by no means complete. There is much more is needed, both in terms of military capabilities and capacities. We have to think also long term. Once the ocean is open, it will be used also by militaries. This means the need for ice-strengthened ships, specific training, warfare, Arctic warfare, improving maritime awareness, surveillance in the region, etc. But I think it's going in the right direction. And again, NATO enlargement to Finland and Sweden will certainly improve that, because it also helps the Nordic countries, Nordic Defence Cooperation, to become more real. The Nordic Defence Cooperation is a long story since early 2000s, but this story was quite hollow, in a sense that there was no Article 5. There was no true commitment. So investing, for instance, in interoperability, or joint purchases was just, it was not really possible because you didn't have the guarantee. You do have now. And so it's the Article 5, including Sweden and Finland, completely, it opens the avenue for a real joint cooperation in terms of logistics, intelligence exchange, joint purchases of material, etc. So, and that will also, of course, strengthen the NATO component in that region. It's been a while since Norway hosted French president, so this was certainly significant, and I think there is also symbolism in that. My reading is that it shows an increased interest of France in Northern Europe, in the High North, and in the Arctic. And I think there is certainly, given France expertise, France is certainly, France is an observer in the Arctic Council, has significant scientific interest and activity, but also, the French capabilities, especially perhaps naval capabilities, are valuable addition to strengthening the presence, defense and deterrence on the northern flank. And, given the NATO enlargement, there will be more focus of Russia to that region. I think French presence is certainly valuable. I think it's also strengthens the transatlantic, the idea of strengthening alliance in the region. So also in that sense, also the transatlantic link in that region is absolutely important. So I think through enhanced deterrence and readiness, France's more or a stronger commitment to closer military and maritime cooperation in the region, certainly from Norwegian perspective, it strengthens also Norway's security, also in the light of Russia's growing assertiveness, including in the region, and Russia's at least maintained focus on the High North and the Arctic, despite Russia being bogged down in Ukraine. So I think it matters. It can, we will see what this cooperation, the enhanced cooperation will actually, how it will develop, but there is a potential also seen from the Norwegian perspective to improve Norway's defense posture through modernization, through a bilateral military and defense innovation. So I think in general, I find it very, very positive. I've been working in security and defense for a long time, and I've been meeting lots of experts, also French experts. But broadly speaking, Norway has been traditionally very focused on UK, on the United States, Germany. France has not been that present. And I think it's a valuable, important, of course, power in NATO, in Europe. And Norway certainly has a great interest to cooperate. And again, from France, I think it's in particular, from what I understand, is the interest in the northern flank, in the Arctic part of the Norwegian capacities, expertise. Of course, there is a very, but I cannot say that this is exactly the reason, but of course, Norway will be buying a new frigate, and France is definitely one of the candidates. So I guess this is also, this visit certainly, this was certainly a topic. Whether this was the main reason, it certainly was an important reason for Macron's visiting. So, and I think we will see what will be the outcome of that and what Norway would choose. But I think it will be very useful also for Norway to increase the defense cooperation with France, and certainly buying a French frigate would lead to that. So certainly this is an important element of that. I think France has a keen interest in the region as well. Again, especially High North and the Arctic and Northern Europe. I mean, if we have a crisis or conflict, the situation in this region will affect France pretty much directly. So, but exactly what was, on the very top of Macron's agenda, I cannot say. So I think forging or shaping the public debate, informing, explaining, bringing experts from different countries to inject different perspective, influence the narrative. If you're thinking about France, because of course the cooperation between these different associations across the transatlantic area is very important too. The example of the Norwegian Atlantic Committee, their role is to participate and draw in the public to draw attention to the questions of transatlantic alliance, the questions of security, communicating it clearly, organizing seminars, debates, writing, being present in the public space to influence the narrative and the debate is incredibly important. And I must say that the Norwegian Atlantic Committee has been doing a formidable work to reaching out to the public and also being a bridge between the public and the politicians and the experts. So I think it's a very, very useful, very important, valuable contribution to the broader sort of educating and debating project in Norway. And I think that's certainly there is a scope for that in NATO. I'm very happy that you created the association. I strongly believe in the alliance. I still believe in the transatlantic link despite the differences with the Trump administration. I think that's, the foundation of the way we are living our lives. I wish you, the best of luck, and I would be happy to contribute if there is any avenue for that. I think organizations like yours play really, really important part strengthening the immune system of the alliance. So I wish you good luck with that.